What's going on? This is Patrick Jaguar, the Cosmic Alchemist, and welcome to my video. Welcome to July of 2020. So, this is one of my monthly videos. I just want to talk about the astrology for July and what that means to all of us. So, what to expect for the month, and I'll give some insights into the year and really into the 2020s to some degree. So, I've been saying for months, every time I do one of these monthly videos, you know, this is going to be an interesting month. It's going to be a crazy month. Well, July is not going to disappoint one bit. And 2020 is just a year of change, a year of changing paradigms, a year where our way of life is going to change. And the important thing to remember is that nobody really has control over what this change is going to look like. And you know, with the juvenile party politics game, that's what everyone promises change, and they promise that their version of change is going to become reality. It never happens. But we can't see that. It never happens that way. And because of that, we get very extreme, and we think that our bandwagon is going to change the whole world, and we think that our bandwagon knows what's best for the entire world, especially for people who have a different point of view. So this is a month in a year that's going to progress really the whole cleansing and healing process that's going on the planet right now. But to do that, we have to take our bitter medicine, we have to take our lumps, and you can't just have things magically rearranged overnight the way you want them. And that's true for everyone. So, you know, I like to be very real in these videos, and people ask me, is there any good news? Well, yeah, there's always good news. And even the tough times are good news, because it means that things aren't going to be the way they are now forever. So, you know, I have to be real in these, and, you know, if people don't like it, then, you know, this is not your place to listen to astrology. So, anyway, you know, some I guess you could say corrections are going to happen in the world, you know, one way or another. The groundwork is being laid for the world to get better, for different institutions to be reformed, for our quality of life to get better, but the problems in the world are going to have to be totally apparent to pretty much all of us before anything can be done. So yeah, we're going to have to go through some rough, and not even really rough times, inconvenient times, because here in America, in the Western world, we don't even know what rough looks like. You know, we panic when just little piddly shit things don't go our way, and we act like the sky's falling. And you know, that's one of the biggest frustrations for me, day in and day out, is like the first step to people doing anything is panicking. And then too, it's like they just can't. People don't have a lot of perspective on the world, you know, and they just can't deal with it when things don't go their way. I've been to a lot of crazy countries and crazy disaster areas and war zones, and so I've seen a lot of different things that most people haven't. So my perspective's a little different. It's not better, it's just I've seen more of the world. I've lived more than a lot of people do in 100 years, so my perspective's different. So anyway, July is going to seem a little crazy. July, you know, you're going to see, like I said, the stage is getting set for things to get better. But we have to go through some frustration. Some people are going to seem really impulsive. They're going to seem desperate. People's extremisms are really going to come out here. And there's some potential for violence, and there's a lot of injustice in the world, and this injustice has been going on for a long time. It's like here in America, in America, it's easy to think that injustice was born in the 1600s when, especially, when the Indians, when their land was being stolen, when slaves started coming over here, it's like, as Americans, we don't have much of a concept of history, so we think that injustice was born when that stuff happened. But, the things that the Europeans did to slaves from Africa, that did to, the American Indians, that was stuff that Europeans learned from the Roman Empire. So the Roman Empire learned their slave game, taking people from Britain, from France, from Germany, from Eastern Europe, from Babylon, what we now call Turkey. The Romans perfected their slave game with those people, and with white people. So that's who the Romans figured out that slave game on, and they actually wrote manuals about how to enslave people, how to control your slaves, and then the Catholic Church preserved those writings, and they were then translated into modern European languages when Europeans went out to colonize the world. So these are very old injustices we're dealing with. And what happens in this world is that different ethnic groups, different racial groups, they get into these competitions about who has it harder, who's had it worse. Different religions compete about this with each other, about who's been persecuted more, who's had it the worst. Everybody's had it at one point or another. It's just who hasn't been done to more recently. That's really what the conversation's about. So to get through this month, to get through this year, and even this decade, it has to dawn on us that we have much more in common than not in common. Every race, every ethnic group has been through these injustices that we see today. And one of the interesting things is that there's actually more slavery in the world today than there's ever been, because after State Department and CIA got rid of Gaddafi, who was actually building a really modern, progressive country in Africa, which was Libya. After CIA and State Department took them down in, 2013, the open slave markets opened on the streets in Libya. Haiti has the same thing. So, yes, injustice has been going on forever, and you can never excuse it, but what went on in the 1800s, 1700s in America, that stuff has been going on for thousands of years, and it's still going on with different people. And actually, here in America, everything we own is made by slaves in China. But, it's not politically correct or fashionable or trendy to talk about that. So that gets no play. There's child labor over there. Apple that makes all our MacBooks and iPads and iPhones. They have suicide nets around the factories because workers try to jump off them. Because they're basically prisoners in there. Apple has dorms that workers live in, and they get herded back and forth, and they're under guard. So, no racial or ethnic group has a unique situation. We've all been through this stuff, and other people are going to go through it in the future. So we need to bear this in mind and realize that we have a lot in common. So, and one thing we have to realize is that, we're being manipulated by the way of our emotions. So not only are there injustices, but we're frustrated from being on lockdown for months to various degrees, depending on where you live. And so our emotions are being completely manipulated, and we're getting steered in different directions. And you have to think like an adult in this world. You have to come to terms with the fact that the media is not there to just had dinner, to enlighten you and to just hand you the truth so you don't have to think or do any research for yourself. The media is sponsored by big companies, big foundations, And they get these billions of dollars in sponsorship money in exchange for telling stories the way that the sponsors want them told. So it doesn't matter if you're a mom or a dad, or you own a house, or you made something of your life by going to college and having a career or joining the military. It doesn't matter if your parents or grandparents won World War II. It just doesn't matter to people who have power. They don't care. They're using you. They know that you are going to pick a side of these issues that they have the media present for them in a certain way, and they know that you're going to vote for one of their politicians that they also sponsor and that they own, whose career that they own, and they tell them what to do. So we need to be adults, and we need to be aware that there's manipulation in the world, and that our emotions get channeled for other people's gain. So, you know, another big thing for this month is that, you know, so many people on every side of every issue think they know what's best for everyone. So keep your ego in check and realize you don't know everything and you don't know what's best for other people. You know, another thing too with, you know, a lot of these protests going on and this rioting, if you're angry about injustice and you're going to go hurt people, maybe kill people, maybe burn buildings down, you know, destroy things and loot, you're a complete hypocrite, because you can't solve injustice by doing that kind of stuff. You're just as bad as the people who you see as persecutors and oppressors. So let's get into the days here. So, you know, we start the month July 1st. Month of July 1st. So, you know, one of the prominent things here is, you know, we want to look at the condition of Mars. So Mars this whole month is in Pisces. Mars doesn't like being in Pisces because Mars is our doer energy, our active energy. You know, it's our builder energy, our warrior, our athlete energy. It just wants to be active and accomplish very tangible things. Build things, destroy things, you know, whatever. Pisces is a Jupiter-ruled sign. Jupiter is a spiritual teacher, the guru, the priest of the cosmos. And Pisces is the more yin sign, as opposed to, because Pisces is a water sign. Sagittarius is Jupiter's other sign, which is a fire sign. So Sagittarius is the yang sign. So Pisces being the yin water sign, Mars doesn't like being here because Pisces is kind of like Jupiter's like ashram, where you are like a shrine out in the wilderness where you go to meditate and do your introspection and do your self-work and, you know, do your internal work. And, you know, it's kind of like, you know, Elon Musk, you know, one time he talked about meditation, and it's very Mars and Pisces because, you know, he said, I tried meditating once and I didn't get anything done, so I didn't do it again. So that's the way people are feeling. In this, you know, so Mars and Pisces, it's basically, it's like putting a warrior into some temple where he has to meditate. He can't go out and do things and be active. So gets impulsive, gets desperate, you know, just gets very on edge and stir crazy. So that's the way we're feeling, because so many people just want the world changed right now and want, you know, every injustice changed for them without them having to change their own lives and change their own attitudes and their own worldviews. So, you know, a lot of stir craziness, impulsiveness, frustration. Now Mars is also in between Ketu and Rahu, so the north and south nodes of the moon. So when you get Mars halfway in between, things can feel very out of control, but very fated and destined things can happen. And in this case, you know, they could be violent, they could be extremist. Another thing we have going on, you know, in the first house in that top center diamond, you know, we have on July 1st, we have the Mercury retrograde there at 15 degrees, same degree that the Sun is at on July 1st. And Rahu's in there at 4 degrees, so the lowest degree. So Rahu's kind of in charge. So you put the Sun and Rahu together. This is where it's really easy to mislead ourselves and to allow other people to mislead us, because Rahu is the dragon's head, and it's all about what we want most in life. But Rahu's the master of illusions. So, Rahu can delude and fool himself and project his desires onto other people and other situations that are not the way he sees them at all. So this is our tendency to do that, to fool ourselves and to not look at things clearly and do our due diligence and ask the right questions and find the facts. And everyone thinks they know the facts right now. So people are very heavily deluded and are seeing a world of illusions right now. They think they have all the facts, but they refuse to look at all the available facts. They just choose the ones that basically gratify their emotional prejudices and what they want to see and believe. So, the sun also deals with your soul's desires and everything you want. So you put Rahu, the master of desire and illusion, with the sun, which is our soul desires. It's kind of us making a hasty decision on what it is that we really want deep down, and just deciding that something or somebody in front of us is exactly that. And making a hasty decision is not a good decision. And then on the first, we also have Mercury retrograde right there at the same degree as the sun. And Mercury retrograde is all about going back and revising things and doing a proofread in your life. Mercury specifically deals with communications, but your intellect, so your ability to think and sort details mentally. So we're not in a good place to do that right now, and we're not thinking clearly, and we're being impulsive about what we want. It's like if you're going to go buy a car and you don't drive it, you don't really look at the condition of it. You just sort of, you get this idea in your head that you're going to look really cool owning and driving that car, and you buy it, and come to find out you don't like the way it drives. The seat hurts your ass when you sit on it. It's got all these problems. It's leaking fluids. And this is what we're being pushed to do, and this Rahu, Sun, and Mercury in Gemini, and Gemini's communications and its mass media. So the mass media it's like that pushy salesman, and it's pushing us to make a decision about what we want the world to look like and what we want our false messiah politicians to give us. So we really need to be aware that, again, we're being manipulated, we're being pushed, and someone's trying to force our hand into making decisions, and they're trying to get us into a bandwagon mentality. So be advised here. Real positive for July is Venus is direct, went direct at the end of June. She's not out of shadow yet. She'll be out of shadow later in the month, but she's home in Taurus. So this is all about quality, and this is all about reevaluating, what is our idea of quality in our lives, and what do we want our lives to look like, and what is wealth to us. Another thing too is that Pluto and Jupiter are conjunct, and they've retrograded back into Sagittarius, and Ketu is there right now. So Ketu in Sagittarius is like textbook telltale extremism. Sagittarius, people say Sagittarius is the truth, and that's not accurate. Sagittarius is our hypothesis of the truth. It's our view of what is true. And as a human being, you're never going to reach the absolute truth. It doesn't matter how intellectual, how educated, how spiritual you are. As human beings, we're divine beings. We're spirits that are inhabiting bodies and having a human experience. So, we're all gods. We're all equal to God. But since we take on this human configuration, our powers of perception have a very limited capacity. So we don't see the whole truth. And so people always talk about, we're going to get to the truth, and they lay out their intellectual credentials of how we're going to get to the truth. Just trust me on this. No, you're not. It doesn't matter who you are, what side of anything you're on. So that's the thing we have to do away with, is this whole concept of the truth and that anyone can have the truth, because the truth doesn't exist. The truth is a consensus reality. It's all about what a group of people is willing to consider true and what they're willing to consider right and wrong. So, and one of the big things going on right now is that so many people think they know what's best for everyone. And when you look at the long scales of the long cycles of the outer planets, the cycles of the outer planets, when you look into this, it starts to make sense. So, Neptune right now, we've got a Neptune at 25 degrees of Aquarius. And so Neptune also deals with delusions, with illusions, with hidden agendas, conspiracies, just sneaky things that are done in the dark. And then Aquarius it's we the people, it's us, it's the masses of people. So when you get Neptune in Aquarius, we the people are deluded and we're falling for illusions and we can't see things clearly. So Neptune was at 25 degrees of Aquarius in 1690, so just before the Salem witch trials. And, boy, do we ever have witch trials going on right now. And I know Donald Trump talks about witch trials, and I don't take a political side. What I just see is that nobody is allowed to just state their opinion on anything because they're automatically a racist or they're a misogynist, or, you just get this label put on you. And there's a lot of intolerance, and it's worse from the people who preach tolerance. From I always tell people, liberal is the new conservative. So being liberal used to be about being a plurality of perspectives, and people could have different perspectives, and that was held in high regard. And now, if you don't think a certain way, liberals will tell you you're a bad person. So conservatism is all about conformity, and you have to do things a certain way or within narrow margins to be a good person. So now the liberals are the same way. So it's like in politics we have two groups of conservatives now. So in 1690, before the Salem witch trials, Neptune was in the same position. Then in 1856, as the stage was being set for the Civil War, the American Civil War, and that was all brewing, Neptune was in the same place. So these are times when people only see 2 points of view, and you're either one side, our side is always the good and righteous side, and the other side is always evil and Satan, and all that bullshit. But then the other side sees themselves as good and righteous, and they see your side as satanic and evil. So that's so juvenile to think that you can just join a group that has it all right and everyone else is wrong. I mean, that's pretty fucking stupid. I have to say it honestly. So anyway, another outer planet, we've got Uranus here. Uranus makes like something on the effect of 80-year orbits, and so Uranus was at 15 degrees of Aries, where it is now. It was in 1936. So that was a build-up to World War II. And, people think World War II was about social justice. It was about the Holocaust. It was about humanitarian concerns. It was about defeating the bad guys. It wasn't about that. World War II was a financial war. Basically, in 1929 and then in the 1930s, the stock market crash, we got the Great Depression because investors just stopped investing. And so there was no money being invested, so businesses couldn't borrow money to expand, and people couldn't borrow money to start businesses. And so institutions and wealthy people just sat on their money because they were afraid to lose it. So the economy turned down. So then not every government in the world, but the first world governments in the world, in Europe and in America, they all had to get huge loans so that they could continue operating and, paying out their entitlements, things like Social Security and pensions and all those kind of things, and, building roads, maintaining roads, bridges, all that kind of stuff, maintaining the military. So every government needed a loan, and they got those loans from banks, from private banks. And, the New Deal was an investment program for private banks, for wealthy individuals. There's this myth out there they teach in school that the New Deal was all about taxing the rich and teaching those 1%ers a lesson. And so they teach that FDR taxed the rich and taught the 1% a lesson. And they had all these public works projects, and they started Social Security, and that's not true, because FDR was a 1%er. He went to Harvard, and he was related to the Delano family, who were Boston Brahmins. They were one of the leading families in Boston, and they made most of their money during the Opium Wars, where the British East India Company took opium out of Afghanistan, and the opium's still coming out of Afghanistan today, and they sold it in China. And then when the Chinese government tried to ban it because there was a massive opioid crisis in China, and this is in the 1800s, when the Chinese government tried to ban it, the British East India Company, which was a corporation, just used the British Navy, they used the warships to bombard the Chinese coastal cities until they allowed opium to be sold again, until they lifted the prohibition. So that's how FDR's, his mother's side, that's how they made all their money. And that's how he got sent to Harvard, and how he lived a life of luxury his whole life. That's where the money came from. So FDR was a 1%er. He went to Harvard, and the guys he went to Harvard with ran Wall Street. So when the government that he was head of needed money, he went to his banker friends and said, hey, we came up with this, my cabinet members of Congress, we came up with these public works projects. They're also investment opportunities. So give us money, we'll guarantee you a return on your investment. So then the government was on the hook to these banks, and Hitler also got loans from the same banks, so did the Soviet Union. But what happened was Hitler defaulted on the loans. So that's why the war had to happen, was because the default was so huge, it was hurting the banks. And coincidentally to the whole thing, the Jewish people in Germany, in that community, there were prominent people in the banking sector. And, one of the banks that Germany borrowed from was the Vatican Bank, also from London and Wall Street banks too. So when the Nazis defaulted on these loans, they wanted to basically go and scoop up the people who were running these banks that they owed money to. So once that happened, the banks told the Allies, like, okay, here's your chance to go reorder the economic world. You can go steal some resources, and that'll guarantee that you can pay us back. So the FDR and his government were under pressure to pay back this money, and they needed to go to war. So whenever there's a depression, the government needs loans, and they have to go to war so that they can pay the money back. And so, all the financial arrangements that were made after World War II were what made the United States prosperous. And the United States basically kind of had a gun to the world's head with nuclear weapons. And that's what made the U.S. dollar the premier currency, and, created all that prosperity in the 50s. So, anyway, Uranus is in the same place it was in 1936. Uranus is going to go to Capricorn in, 2021, 2022. So when Uranus goes to Capricorn, it's going to be where it was in 1939 when World War II started. So, we're reliving history, and really we're kind of in this world war already. We'll see what happens. The solar eclipse on June 21st went right over the Galwan Valley. It's a border region in the Himalayas between China and, Chinese controlled Tibet and India, and there was actually a brawl between Chinese and Indian soldiers. So this is two nuclear armed powers, you know, having fisticuffs here and having a border dispute, because those mountains are all full of rare earth minerals that they need to build electronics and, you know, lithium batteries for everybody's electric cars. So, you know, these cycles of history are gearing up, you know, and jumping back to, actually I talked about Neptune, but jumping back to that, 1856, Neptune was in the same place. In 2026, Neptune is going to go to where it was in 1861 when the Civil War started. So, you know, a lot of historical cycles are converging here. So anyway, another thing we have here starting the month is, you know, we have in Sagittarius, I mentioned this once already, but, you know, we have Pluto, Jupiter, and Ketu all in Sagittarius, and, you know, on the eclipse, Pluto and Jupiter were over New York City. And so, in December 2007, Jupiter and Pluto were conjunct over New York City, and that was what sort of opened the window for the financial crisis in 2008. So that's another thing we have coming up here. So, and another thing too is, you know, we have Jupiter back in retrograde in Sagittarius, and Saturn is going to stay in Capricorn, but later this year Saturn and Jupiter are going to conjunct in Capricorn, and every 20 years they conjunct, and you've got the, you know, the curse of Tippecanoe, where you know, the presidents they die in office, someone tries to assassinate them, or someone succeeds. So a lot of big things going on this year into next year, and, you know, into the decade. So yeah, we've got so much going on here. So let's go to July 4th. July 4th is, you know, the moon enters Sagittarius, where we've got Jupiter and Pluto conjunct. We've got Ketu in there. So, you know, I'm trying to put good vibes out there, that nothing crazy happens on the 4th of July, because that night at midnight there's going to be that lunar eclipse, and you know, basically the solar eclipse kind of lays some groundwork, and then the lunar eclipse helps that solar eclipse unfold, because the moon is the sun's reflector. So they work together. So, you know, 4th of July, you know, we're dealing with all these same factors. We've got this Kalasarpa Yoga, where all the planets are on one side of the Rahu-Ketu axis. Mars is halfway in between Rahu and Ketu, so a lot of potential for just out-of-control events. But, you know, there are things that were fated and that were destined, and that had to happen. And then, you know, when you get the moon coming into the same sign with Jupiter, Pluto, Ketu, our minds go to a very extreme kind of fanatical kind of a place. So, you know, with all the protests that have been going on, you know, and the, you know, a lot of people are not happy with our country, our country's history, things that our country is doing now. You know, this could really be, the 4th of July holiday could really be a magnet for, you know, people's aggression and their anger and their extremism. Because like I said, for some people, they're taking part in these protests, their answer for injustice is to hurt people, to burn buildings down, to destroy things, to loot businesses. So 4th of July could bring this out of people. You know, the exact anniversary for the 4th of July, what I use is 6:30 p.m. You know, and it's generally believed that the Declaration of Independence was signed at about 6:30 p.m. on July 4th, 1776. So we'll see what happens here. Now, the you know, one thing I would say here about this 4th of July is, you know, I would don't just stay in your home and, you know, just don't stay home because you're scared. You know, if you want to see people, go see people. You know, any state you live in, you know, gatherings aren't banned. They're just limited. You know, it's what, like 10, 15 people per gathering. So, you know, I would say don't give in to, you know, some people want you to be so afraid that you're not going to come out of your house for the rest of the year or the rest of the next year. And that's a bunch of fear porn being sold. And there's a lot of paranoid fantasies that are being sold in the media. So don't stay in just because you're scared. You know, if you want to stay in, stay in. But, you know, so I'd say, yeah, if you want to go see people, go see people. But be wise about the company you're keeping. You know, don't hang out with crazy people. Don't hang out where people are doing a bunch of drinking and doing drugs. Because people could just go a little nuts. Because, you know, that 4th of July partying, you know, a good 4th of July party goes into, you know, around midnight, and, you know, about 12:45 a.m., which is the 5th, is when the lunar eclipse is happening. And so, you know, kind of moving on to that lunar eclipse, you know, this lunar eclipse is it's a window opening where, you know, it's a window inside of our own minds, our own emotions, and then a window in the wider world where, you know, some real, just really unconscious behavior can come out of us, you know, where the extremism can really come out and express itself. You know, and these ideas that have been going around that, you know, one group of people know what's best for everyone and they have all the answers, and if you don't agree with us, we're going to start, you know, looting you and beating you up, and, you know, maybe even killing people. And, you know, it's like with the BLM thing going on. It's like these cops have been caught talking about killing black people, but then there are plenty of black people talking about, you know, we might have to kill white people to, you know, to fix the country. So it's like it's on both sides. So just be mindful of who you spend your time with on the 4th of July and then the night of the 5th, because, you know, this lunar eclipse is happening in Sagittarius with this Jupiter and Pluto conjunct, and with Ketu. So, you know, Sagittarius really lends itself to extremism because it thinks it knows the absolute truth, and it thinks it has the correct philosophy and the only correct philosophy. And when Ketu's in Sagittarius, it's very extremist and very obsessive. And, you know, Pluto, the god of the underworld, drags things out of the dark and shows you the ugly parts of yourself that you don't want to deal with or acknowledge. And it shows you the ugly parts of the collectives, the groups that you're part of. And, you know, when Jupiter is at home in Sagittarius, it can and especially retrograde, it can also be very very extremist and very, you know, just a lot of know-it-all energy. Jupiter is usually very expansive and sort of welcoming and all-inclusive. When Jupiter goes retrograde, it gets angrier. So, you know, this is the general energy of this eclipse. It can be very obsessive, very extremist, and it can, you know, a lot of anger in it. So, because people think they know what's best, and they're going to do what they need to do to advance their own view and their group's view. So, you know, be mindful of that. You know, and later in the day, Moon's going to conjunct Jupiter and Pluto. So, and that's after the eclipse. So that can just really heighten all of it. So, and while this is going on, while this lunar eclipse is going on, interestingly, in the opposite sign in Gemini, the Sun is conjunct Sirius. And so the Sun will be at 19 degrees Gemini during the lunar eclipse. So Sirius is it's a fixed star. It was called, you know, in the nativity story about the birth of Jesus, it's an astrology story that was basically borrowed and was told about, you know, this baby Messiah being born. you know, the three wise men following the star in the east. Well, Sirius is the star in the east, and then the three wise men are the three stars in Orion's belt. So, you know, this astrological phenomenon of these stars lining up was, you know, was adopted to write this story in the gospel. But anyway, Sirius was in the ancient world was very revered. The ancient Egyptians revered Sirius, and they said that that's where their gods came from and taught them, you know, how to have a civilization. And so Sirius is seen as a star that helped with enlightenment and, you know, uplifting of consciousness. So even if something crazy does happen, it's gonna sort of wake us up, or has the potential to help wake us up, or at least wake some people up to, you know, how things really are, and to snap us out of this view of, well, I'm in the correct bandwagon, or the correct movement, or the correct party, and we know what should be done, and nobody else gets it. So, yeah, you have this kind of gnarly, ugly eclipse, but then you have the sun conjunct with Sirius. So, silver linings. So then we have July 12th, Mercury goes direct, so the retrograde ends. And so, you know, kind of through that Mercury retrograde, we were supposed to be reevaluating, you know, where our thinking is, where our intellect is, the way we communicate. And now it's going to go direct, and, you know, hopefully we've done that work, and we've sort of we've done the review in our own lives, and we kind of got our thinking straight. So some people did, some people didn't, and, you know, now we have to go forward with however we use that 3 weeks of Mercury retrograde. But, you know, Mercury goes direct, it'll be at 3 degrees of Gemini, 11 degrees of Gemini. Rahu will be at 3 degrees, and then the Sun will be at 26. So the Sun's moving away from Rahu, but they're still influencing each other. So, you know, we're still making hasty decisions on, you know, what it is we want, and we're not looking clearly, and we're not thinking about how we communicate. So some of that communication is still there, where it's kind of, it's not clear, and it's not based on clear thinking. So then we get to the 16th of July. Sun transits into Cancer, so the Kalasarpa Yoga ends. Important thing here is that first nakshatra is Pushya. So Pushya, and for the rest of the month, Sun's going to be in Pushya, in Cancer. So Pushya is all about sort of doing services in a very selfless way to other people. It's about making sacrifices for other people very selflessly. But then the dark side of Pushya is that when people's selfless service and sacrifices, when they don't feel it's properly appreciated, people can go crazy, and they can actually get violent about it. So, you know, what I see with this is that, you know, we have very short attention spans in America, in the Western world in general, and, you know, people at this time, you know, they've been protesting for a few weeks, and they might get even crazier and more desperate, more violent, because they think the world should be fixed just because they've been raising hell for a few weeks. So, you know, you could see a little kind of an uptick. You know, somebody could just be around his day, could just kind of up the ante on, you know, what they're willing to do to be heard, basically, or, you know, for their cause to be heard. You know, the thing about Cancer, where the Sun's going, is Cancer is all about being comfortable. It's all about providing yourself nourishment and a sense of comfort. So people really want that right now, and especially after, you know, being on lockdown for months, people are definitely not feeling the comfort, and they're kind of desperate to get that back. And that's an interesting thing with all the protests, is like, you know, you see these protests being hijacked, like you see Black Lives Matter being hijacked by people in the I always screw this up, LGBTQ movement. Those people, who are part of, the gay community and the trans community, they're going to the Black Lives Matter protests, but then they're just fronting their own cause, and they're just giving Black Lives Matter like a little lip service. So they're actually like hijacking it. So I think these are people who, they don't know what else to do with themselves, because they can't go to work, they can't go to the movies, they can't go to sporting events, they can't socialize. So they're kind of like, ever since what happened, ever since that cop went crazy, in Minneapolis, these people from the gay and trans movement have been kind of like hopping on and hijacking, BLM. And so, again, people have just not felt comfortable in a long time, and they kind of don't know what to do with themselves, so they're sort of like, they're kind of hijacking an ongoing protest. So it's kind of interesting. Now, another thing, when the sun transits to Cancer, there's going to be an aspect. An aspect is going to be starting between the sun and Saturn. So Saturn's at 4 degrees of Capricorn, and so on the 16th, sun will be at 0 degrees of Cancer. So there's still 4 degrees off. It's not a perfect aspect, but what Saturn will kind of bring is that when the sun and Saturn are going to be looking at each other from opposite signs, Saturn kind of brings it brings so much realism that people can feel kind of depressed, because Saturn is all about just getting things done the right way and being practical, and just having everything taken care, having all the details taken care of properly. So Sun going into Cancer can be very optimistic, and just wants to sort of throw off all its cares and its responsibilities, and it just wants to be comfortable and have a good time. But then Saturn's like, whoa, wait a minute. Did you do your chores? Did you get all your work done? So that can kind of make people kind of angry, kind of, just a little out of their minds, kind of desperate, because they want to feel good and they want to be optimistic, but Saturn's like, whoa, wait a minute, no, it's not time yet. So, and then too, Uranus will square the sun. Uranus is the bringer of change and the bringer of sudden, unexpected upheaval. So, people will think that they're going to get their way, and their group is going to get their way, and change the world overnight. But then Uranus is going to come in and totally flip the script and bring in a whole unforeseen factor. So, it can really kind of disappoint people, make people depressed, make people really angry. So, just, it's like I've been saying, this is a great month to just sit back, take a breath, try to find something to be happy about and something to enjoy, and just relax, because you're not going to transform the world overnight. So then we move on to July 20th, and we've got a new moon in Cancer. So the new moon it's the darkening of the moon, so the moon is the sun's reflector. The moon is not a light source by itself. It needs the sun's light. It needs to reflect that light so it can be illuminated. So during the new moon, the moon is darkened by the Earth's shadow. So the sun represents the soul and the moon represents the mind. So when the moon is darkened and it can't receive the light of the sun, basically our minds can feel very isolated and cut off and very alone, because they feel separated from the light and the energy of the soul. Our minds need the energy of our bodies and the energy of our souls to run. So, during this new moon, and then during the new moon, moon and sun are at 4 degrees of Cancer. Well, because Saturn moves slow, Saturn is still at 4 degrees of Capricorn. So this new moon is going to be a mutual aspect and opposition on the T, to the degree, between Sun and Moon on one side and Saturn on the other. And then again, Sun and Moon are in Pushya, so there's that Pushya again. It's people give selfless services to other people and selfless sacrifices, but they do it in a way where they want recognition and they want to be thanked. If they don't feel like they're appreciated, then they can get crazy, and they can get so crazy that they can get violent. So and Saturn so you already have that going on with Sun and Moon being in Pushya and the Moon being darkened, but then you get that kind of some of that depression from Saturn, so people could really kind of be off their rockers, So yeah, with the Sun and Moon in Pushya during this new moon, it's already, people are feeling, especially people who feel like they've done some kind of service and made sacrifices for people, especially with all these protests going on. People feel like they're doing something for other people to change the world and make the world better. So it's like if somebody doesn't feel appreciated, they can really have a meltdown. And then Saturn kind of brings in, Saturn brings in reality, but with reality can come depression, especially if you're not being realistic about what you're accomplishing, and if you're taking on, if you're taking on more than you're capable of, then Saturn's realism can really bring in some depression. So just be aware of the company you're keeping, and don't fall for the peer pressure and not express your opinion if it differs from the politically correct mainstream. But don't shoot your mouth off around crazy people. Use common sense. I realize that common sense is kind of special sense these days, but use your head. Use your intuition too. Be balanced. So, alright, so then the end of the month, July 31st, really the one transitive note, we have Venus transiting into Gemini. So Venus just went through a whole kind of a death and rebirth, because in June in Taurus, its home sign, Venus went through a retrograde, switched from being the evening star to the morning star, so the morning star, Lucifer, the light bringer. And there was this whole thing about Venus being reborn, but then sort of like bringing the dawn, bringing the new dawn. And Taurus is its home, and it's all about value, and and what we believe is a value, and what we want in our lives, and what value we want to bring into our lives. So now July 31st, Venus is going to transit into Gemini. It's going to be there with Rahu, and it's going to be with Mercury. Mercury's just going to be there for a few days. But so it's interesting when you get, Gemini is all about communication. It's all about media. When you get Venus and Rahu together, you can kind of get, things can go a little overboard, because both Venus and Rahu can deal with addictions. Rahu is, the trickster, is into mischief, illusions, deception. So you put those two together, you can have really creative kind of deception, really creative sort of sneaky activity on the one hand. Then on the other hand, you put Venus and Rahu together, you can really create and make unbelievably beautiful, innovative things. So it's all about how the energy is used. It's never one way. And then you've got Mercury there, so you can either have somebody can be using the intellect to be really sneaky with media and really deceive people and be really clever, or they can somebody can use this energy to really communicate something really different and innovative, and really beautiful. So we have to see where it goes, and it's up to us in our own lives to decide how we're going to use the opportunities of these conjunctions and these energies. So that's pretty much July. Just to recap, it's like, don't be careful of your own extremism, because we're all being manipulated by the media. And the media sells dark fantasies, paranoid fantasies. Media is a wing of the intelligence community in every country. Intelligence communities spend 85-90% of their budgets within their own borders creating the news and shaping how the news is told. So just be aware that somebody wants you to be angry. Somebody wants you to get violent because they can profit from it. And a lot of people, want to censor you and not let you express your opinion. There's a lot of, and there's so many things you can't talk about. COVID is not what it was promised. They made all these ventilators, now they don't need them. They're predicting all these people coming down with it and dying from it. And, it's not happening the way people thought it was. And if you point this out, then you're a conspiracy theorist. Or if you point out that the disease has been around for 4 months, 4, 5, 6 months, whatever. How in 6 months or less can you know everything there is to know about a disease and how it's transmitted? It's just people are control freaks. We're raised to be control freaks, and they're threatened by anything or anyone they can't control. So that's why there's all this censorship. So, really be aware of your own reactions to things, because when you watch your emotions and your thoughts, they behave better. They're like little kids. They're like your dog or your cat. They get into less trouble when you're watching. So do this with your own thoughts and emotions, because they are living things with a life of their own. They're not you. So that's going to be about it. I feel like there's something else I was going to include, but I'd have to wait for another video. But be safe out there, and don't remember, it's like I say, liberal is a new conservative. So don't let people, if you have a different opinion, don't let people crush it. Don't censor yourself, because the bandwagon and the peer pressure is trying to get us all to censor ourselves. So that's all I've got for you. Thanks for tuning in. I highly recommend you get a Vedic astrology reading from me. This is very helpful in a year like this, to help you to navigate through this year, to see where your life is going to be going in the 2020s, what opportunities and potentials there are. And it's a roadmap for the rest of your life to help you capitalize and even maybe discover your hidden talents, your hidden strengths, your hidden gifts. And it helps you to know what your pitfalls are and your greatest challenges, and how to steer clear of those as best as possible. So thanks again for tuning in. My site is thecosmicalchemist.com. I also do rune readings, and I have some Qigong videos for download. Qigong is a great mind-body practice. Breathing is a huge part of it, and everybody needs good breathing right now to relax, to boost their immune systems. So it's great for centering yourself, getting your blood flowing, and just kind of getting your mind off your mind, getting back in your body, and helping you to relax. So thanks again. Talk to you later.